Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read out about Elizabeth Barrett Browning. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach. I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need by sunlight and candlelight. Luckily, Robert is enthusiastic indeed. He urges her to include the sequence in his next collection. All the same, he has a canny idea. He suggests using a title to signal that he isn't to be read as scandalous confession, but as a serious literary project. Elizabeth first thinks of sonnets translated from the Bosnian from sonnets from the Portuguese, has the additional virtue of deflecting attention into her poem on Catarina on Camoens. Portugal's national poetry, which immediately precedes the sonnets in her manuscript, as also alludes to the rich tradition of homage to the 17th century French letters Portuguese, a woman's love letter, supposedly by a Portuguese nun, a literary sensation that in the middle of the 19th century is still attracting wide readership and distinguished translations. Last and not least, buried among these literary allusions is Robert's nickname for Elizabeth, his little Portuguese. Perhaps it's the injection of joy that works. Gradually, Robert recovers from his long funk. About a month after the family returns to Casa Guidi in mid-October, he starts writing the diptychs Christmas Eve and Easter Day. In the March 1850, he sends his manuscript to Chapman and Hall, who turns it around quickly, publishes it on April 1st. At last, the critical response is respectful, substantial, and close reading, though there is no raves and sales remain poor. Meanwhile, in February, Elizabeth has sent her own manuscript, a substantial volume including heavily revised versions of Prometheus Bound and the Seraphim, most of poets of 1844, recent poems and the sonnets. It appears in poems of 1850, 100 years before I was born, and one. A critical response will be, by her standards, muted. Several critics assume that this is large, a reissue plus new translations. It is also be the first time that she's widely characterized as a poetess, as if marriage has gendered her, removing her liberty to be pure, ungendered mind. The Christian Register will dismiss her as deficient in the weight and breadth of thought, that enlarged view of life, which is essential to the highest poetry as the highest philosophy. The English Review will will out Arthur Thompson Gurney for the hatchet job, which starts with a 1,300-word rant on the endless twaddle of female poetry and gratuitously brings in Robert as, upon the whole, the higher and the master spirit. The Morning Poet, who also gradually has been in the opinion that Elizabeth Browning is the best English poetess since the days of Felicia Hemans. The grace and sensibility, which are so charmingly characteristic of female genius, are found throughout her poetry, and so on. Even the Athenaeum will crystallize the double-edged compliment. Mrs. Browning is probably, of her sex, the first imaginative writer England has produced in any age. She is beyond comparison the first poetess of her own right, and yet she arrived at the canonical moment. In 1850, there is a Harper's will put it, a wide circle which she learned to venerate Mrs. Browning's genius, the most remarkable poetess of modern times. Her body of work isn't huge, but she's not a bestseller, but almost by stealth, she has become one of the undeniable poets. Gurney is right in one way, though. She is undeniably a woman. 1849 summer pregnancy has been ended in the second half of October by a bloodbath, enough to make Elizabeth faint. There is only final throw of the dice. This spring, at the age of 44, she falls pregnant for the fifth and final time. Spring 1850 is an exciting time in general. On 6th of April, Henrietta said Surtees finally marry after a wait of 6 years. Money is still a worry, but to delay any longer would be folly. At 41, the bride is even older than Elizabeth was on her wedding day. Like her older sister, Henrietta tries the best not to elope. She and Surtees ask her father's permission, which she refuses on the perverse grounds that she's a hypocrite because she'll go ahead and marry whatever his response. But this time, the Barrett brothers, though generally obtuse in such matters, Elizabeth dryly observes, and more supportive. Treppy even braves the wedding itself. Only Bummy, whose conduct has been, I do think, shameful and most treacherous, as Arabella says, betrays her niece by sending Papa the letters in which Henrietta confines her plans, commenting, "I grieve for you, dearest Edward." The match holds up a mirror to Elizabeth's own hard-won happiness. What emotion this has stirred to me, how I have felt every line of it, gone with the through of whole trial, no less bitter indeed, because if God pleases, happiness and love catch up the ends of it forever. But now the literary world holds up a mirror too. The same month, shortly after his 18th birthday, William Wordsworth dies symbolically on Shakespeare's birthday. Almost immediately, the question arises of who will succeed him as poet laureate. On June 1st, the Athenaeum publishes its opinion that this is no living poet of either sex who can prefer a higher claim than that of Mrs. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and that to have a female laureate would be at once an honorable testimony to the individual, a fitting recognition of the remarkable place which the women of England have taken on literature of the day, a graceful compliment of the sovereign herself. As Elizabeth tells Arabelle, somebody in the name of Langley suggested it first in the Daily News. The Globe took it up, and Robert saw it in 2 or 3 other English papers. Besides Giuliani, we glimpse, fascinatingly, her pragmatism. It's curiously to myself that I should seem to have a chance, a faint one though, becoming the gallantry of Englishmen always takes care, carefully taking off its hat to push a woman against the wall upon principle, even among besides, even among the candidates named, both Leigh Hunt and Tennyson are worthier than I, and except as a proof that women have made some way against prejudice, I think shrink from every thought of appearing in the competition. Of course, it will take another half a century and a half for Britain to create the first woman poet laureate. It is Tennyson who is finally appointed in November, just 3 weeks after Elizabeth's poems of 1850 has appeared. If she's disappointed, her correspondence gives no suggestion of it. Instead, reading Tennyson's In Memoriam in December, she finds it appeals heart to heart, directly in from her own to the universal heart. Besides, there is a more critical disappointment in her personal life. On July 28th, she suffers a near fatal miscarriage, losing above 100 ounces of blood within 24 hours, as Robert overshares with John Kenyon. A month later, she was still pale. When I took on the glass, I see nothing but a perfectly white and black face, the eyes being obliterated by large blots of blackness. When the family moved to the countryside to the summer of cool, they had rented the Villa Poggio al Vento outside Siena, which, as its name suggests, sits on a sunny, windy knoll with a vineyard on the door, and the purple of grapes caught sight of down the vistas and vines, the magnificent view beyond all. Little Weedman, who has also been ill with heat stroke, turning to fever, and both patients recovered quickly in the country air, even though, except the blackberries and grapes, yes, and except the donkey and the pigeons and the pig and the great yellow dog, baby doesn't particularly enjoy a rural life. The trip ended with the week in Siena, and for Wilson, the crushing disappointment of a disappearing act by Signor Righi, who broke their engagement with his cruelly practical expediment. But once they're home on the second week of October, Elizabeth goes down to work. She started writing the second part of what will become Casa Guidi Windows, almost as a repost to the part one of the Meditation of Tuscany now becomes. She has also composed a prefatory advertisement drawing attention to the eponymous windows as framing limited device. No continuous narrative nor exposition of political philosophy is attempted. It is a simple story of personal impressions, she claimed, distancing herself from her own response to the Tuscan dream of independence and underlying her poem's radically subjective approach. Perhaps she should remember that she wrote she was fading for her previous book to come out and anticipating the critical reception of the sonnets in particular. All the same, her caution now reminds us how thoroughly she's a cultural Victorian, aiming to speak not for the intellectual avant-garde, but from the heart of conscious morality. By the time Casa Guidi Windows is published next May, Elizabeth will know both the muted verdict on Poems 1850 and in which way the tide of British public opinion is turning over Italy. At first, her political caution seems to have been rewarded. When the book appears on May 21st, 1851, it receives more than 24 reviews in Britain, America, and Europe. From the Literature Gazette to the Athenaeum and the Scotsman, most chorus applause for both her sentiments and the poetry itself. Especially in part two, critics seem to find it hard to separate politics From Poetics, the Liberator praises her relentless insight into the heart of Italian strength and weakness and the cardinal principles of all reform, reminding its readers she is the only poet of the first rank in England, except Campbell, who has made a direct offering to the altar of American anti-slavery. For Revista Britannica, the poem offers a reposit of Gough's dismissal of political poetry, and the month's Christian Spectator, a principled response to despotism, and to Die Getsboten, proof of why Elizabeth is revered as a prophet by all the ambitious minds of her race in England, but the feminizing consequences that pay some of it as a black-handed compliment. The Morning Chronicle will not call her poetess, for Miss Barrett Browning's mind is masculine, Fraser's altogether mind-like, and the Electric Review, which grumbles that her otherwise manly and prominent progression advocates violence, much as negative. Mrs. Browning presents us with a pleasant little volume of extracts from the journal of her residence in Florence, sneers the Prospective Review, the Manchester Guardian's compliment about diffuse and rather commonplace reflection and regret. She is really not at home in politics, and social philosophy becomes understandably when it declares its own political allegiance. She must get better heroes than Mazzini and Garibaldi. Worst of all, the English Review, woe to relate, Mrs. Browning is not contented with being Mrs. Elizabeth Barrett Browning. She will be Robert Browning also, starts the long trend in Browning reception for ignoring chronology and poetic record to claim that Elizabeth imitates her husband. By the time this notice appears in the Brownings themselves have left Casa Guidi, the 18 months they'll stay after from May 3rd, 1851 to mid-November 1852 illustrates starkly the dilemma posed by Elizabeth's health. In sunny Italy, she appears as strong as anyone. It is Robert who suffers from the lack of social and cutting-edge cultural stimulation, but now they travel north to rejoin the cultural world. Elizabeth starts to cough. Something is on the turn. Still, it doesn't look that way at first. Leaving Penn's Balia behind in the rainy Florence, they set out for Paris, visiting Bologna, Modena, Parma, and Manuta, and Venice. They are rent rooms in the Guardian Canal for the month, and Elizabeth falls for the mystery of the rippling streets and soundless gondolas. But while she and Penn thrive in the watery city and the toddler's Italian vocabulary comes on pace, Wilson seems constantly bilious, and Robert can't eat or sleep and suffers from continuous nervous irritability. He even overrules Elizabeth on how to dress their son. Robert and I have quarreled about it yesterday, and Robert had the upper hand. Robert wants to make the child like a boy, he says, because he is a man, and I feel to him to be a baby as long as possible. The truth is that the child is not like a boy, and that if you put him into a coat and waistcoat forthwith, you not only would look at a small angel transvested, but he isn't exactly like a girl either. No, not a bit. He's sort of a neutral creature so far, and it vexes Robert when people ask if he is a boy or a girl. Oh, man's pride. This is ironic. It's not so long ago that Robert was himself the ringleted one rather than the high-handed husband of the cameo. A little earlier still, Elizabeth was the sort of neutral creature, the child Ba. Certainly enough through the literary dreamer remains in both Brownings for them to retrace Lord Byron's route through city and lagoon 3 decades ago, the visit the Lido, the Armenian Marcatris Monastery, and the San Milazzo Delegati Armeni, where as part of his anti-Ottoman crusade, Byron had studied Armenian with his superior Hartutian Akurian and collaborated on an English-Armenian dictionary and the grammar that contributed to the Armenian Renaissance. Thrillingly, and even bump into Ackerman himself, the old man with the white beard long below his waist, sitting under a rose tree in full bloom. The 3 week in June sees more cultural pilgrimage. The family continues north via Padua, Patriarch's house of Accia, Milan's cathedral, and Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper, the Italian lakes, and St. Gothard's Pass, and Lucerne. Here on June 24th, they discover the reason that Elizabeth's annual ship money has been delayed. The David Lion has only generated 1/4 of its unusual profit. The shortfall puts an abrupt end to the further sightseeing. They take the quietest, cheapest route to Paris, where they arrive in June 30th, and that is their honeymoon journey. Take rooms in the Hotel Armes de la Villa de Paris. As highlight of the 3 week stopover in the French capital is meeting the Tennysons Alfred already knows Robert, so neither he nor his wife, Emily, have met Elizabeth. Now the couples meet up 3 times a quick session, getting on so well that Alfred even offers the use of Twickenham home, and Robert has suddenly gone cold feet about crossing the channel. Apparently, he remains his mother's boy, still more concerned about his own grief than the needs of his widowed father, sister, or wife. The idea of taking his wife and child to the New Cross and putting them into the place of his mother was haunting him day and night, and I was afraid to think how it might end. As soon as he decided not to go, the imagination had been quieted. He was better at once. Then suddenly he couldn't bear to disappoint Arabelle, and he would go to the lodging in London near her and so visit her own home by himself and get it over. The couple finally arrive in London on April 23rd and take a rental at 26 Devonshire Street, less than 5 minutes on foot from 50 Whipple Street. It is very close, yet not quite home. It is a position on the thick-set edge. I can't make a movement to right or left without pain, Elizabeth puts it. The 2 months here will be a time of emotional struggle for both her and Robert, who goes almost immediately to New Cross to see his family. Thank God it is not to be looked forward to anymore. He is himself again Elizabeth's record. The decision made for such difficulty proves a good one. Soon exciting plans are being laid. Henrietta brings her husband and first child up by train from Taunton to spend the beginning of August in Benedict Street, equally close to Whipple Street and Arabella. Of the brothers, Henry has a very kind incoming, not infrequently. He has a kind, good heart. Ose, too, has been there 3 or 4 times. Alfred and Seti once. Meanwhile, dear George was very good and kind and feeling to me at last. It made me really happier. Only Papa remains obdurate, refusing to see even his first grandchild, writing a very violent and unsparing letter in response to Robert's overture. Indeed, he returns Elizabeth's letters, all with their unbroken seals, testifying to the sealed up heart which refused to open by me. So it is very disastrous and hopeless, his daughter's grieves. But by contrast, artistic and literary London embraces the couple. They see old friends like Mary Russell Mitford and John Kenyon. Through the American artist Thomas Buchanan Reed, they befriend Dante Gabriel Rossetti more ever. Mr. Arnold, the Chancery barrister, has begged us to go to live in townhouse. Miss Fanny Kremble called on us, left us tickets for her Shakespeare reading. Mr. Forster of the Examiner gave us a magnificent dinner at Thames Ditton on the site of the Swans, and we breakfast on Saturday with Mr. Rogers. And we have seen the Literary Guild actors of the Hanover Square Rooms, and we have passed an evening with Carlyle. It's a great dazzling heap of things new and strange. Barry Cornwall, Mr. Proctor, came to see us every day till swept him out of town, and near Mr. Jameson left her Madonna for us to despite of the printers. Such kind on all sides. For now it's Elizabeth's turn to falter. This kindness in England after yet I grew cold to the heart, and I set foot on the ground, and it wished myself away, as well as griefs that remain too immediate. She can't bear to visit Julia Martin in Hertfordshire, which reminds her of Bro. She's falling ill. It's still summer, but London is a polluted city set in a basin nearly at city level where dust and industrial dirt hang in the air in the lungs. The quality of the air does not agree with me. That's evident. For nearly 5 years, I've had no such cough nor difficulty of breathing, and I get much paler every day. And so we pass the winter in Paris in the hope of being able to bear the climate. And indeed, Italy is too far. And if the winter does not disagree with me too much, we mean to take a house and settle in Paris so as to be close. Lie lowing in Northern Europe, Paris has a climate much better than London's, and even this compromise is proved unworkable. Nevertheless, it completes the couple's best hope of life among their friends and loved ones. They cut short their London stay and leave for France on the 25th of September, traveling this time with Thomas Carlyle. After a rough crossing in the night in Dieppe, they're packing at the Hotel des Arnes, where they rest for the night before moving into the second-floor apartment, flooded with sunshine at 138 Avenue des Champs-Élysées. Ample reward for Robert's miseries in house hunting. The pretty, cheerful, carpeted rooms comprise a drawing room, a dressing and writing room for Robert, and a small dining room, 2 comfortable bedrooms, and a third room upstairs for a female de service. Kitchen and the 200 francs a month. address is gloriously fashionable too, and there will remain here till the London to return next July. In fact, that is like it is so much that the spring in 1853, Robert's father and sister will move in. One shortcoming seems obvious. There's no writing room for Elizabeth, and within 2 days of moving in, Robert's appearing an edition of Moxon for what will unfortunately prove to be forged letters by Shelley, has taken to his new room with green curtains and sits there half on sun and half in shade, doing his Shelley to his heart's content. Monday, he said, was the happiest day he had since he left England, and he never had lived in a house he liked so well as this. So Casa Guidi is slighted, you see, dear Casa Guidi. It's a moment of what seems like masculine ascendancy. In the same week, Baby, now 2.5, invents his nickname. He has now taken to himself, called to himself Panini, and in an extraordinary revolution of syllables will mean Weidham. Panini can do this. Panini can do that. Panini wants this and that all day long. This autumn, the small boy obsessed with soldiers graduates to trousers, such ridiculous tiny trousers up to his knees and long white garnet gaiters. It's a beautiful costume, and he is much admired. His mother boasts she still loves dressing him in a white felt hat, white satin ribbons and feathers, really the prettiest hat I ever saw, and he looks lovely in it, with a trimming of blue satin ribbon each inside of each cheek. But odd, even though this sounds in the 21st century, she's doing nothing unusual. Even in the sleepy Taunton, Henrietta contemplates a black felt hat for her first son, Altum, while Parisians go altogether further. Did you know in Paris that even put the boy in curl papers? Boys 10 years old. Wilson has seen curled up regularly in the morning, a process which I could not approve of. It's nothing to do with gender, only with privilege and ostentation, for appearance matters. Now, after moving in, Elizabeth has a sack of cooking housekeeper, caught 3 times with her lover coming out of her room because the facts were known in the house and we could not keep a woman of disreputable character. Her replacement is Desiree, a little brisk, laughing creature who tumbles out everything, has no method, Wilson says, but who cooks extremely well and is a good-natured if possible. But scandal turns up nevertheless. Desiree is installed in mid-October and in time for the arrival of Robert's father and sister in a 3-week visit, during which Robert Sr. divulges that back in New Cross he's got involved with a widow called Minnie von Muller. Under the misapprehension that she's bothering his father, Robert writes the lady a stern letter. Fortunately, the old man hasn't been entirely honest. Scandalously, on July 1st, the following year, huge damages of £800, about 25 times of agricultural labor's annual salary, will be awarded against him for both breach of promise and defamation of Miss von Miller's character, an evidence which includes over 50 love letters, plus a false accusation of bigamy and Robert's own hotshot across her bows. 3 weeks after the court ruling, Robert's father and sister will flee the country. This case is shockingly enough to make the papers, and Robert, who escorts them to Paris, will feel it to the heart of his heart. But these personal embarrassments are to come. Meanwhile, the old year ends in darkness and drama. On December 2nd, 1851, Charles Louis Napoleon Bonaparte leads a coup in the streets of Paris. Elizabeth is sanguine in letters home. She used to European revolutions going on around her, but she has battles of her own. This month, she's once again seriously ill with bronchitis, perhaps even pneumonia, and in January, as she sits coughing in the Champs-Élysées apartment, she is deeply hurt to discover that Mary Russell Mitford has betrayed her confidence by writing about her death of Bro, in a memoir, Recollections of a Literary Life. Robert, on the other hand, is thriving in Paris. His New Year's resolution in 1852 to write a poem a day will result eventually in Man and Woman, a book which he takes his great step forward. He's being encouraged in his work by a new friend, the critic Joseph Milsand, who back in August publishes a highly complimentary essay dedicated to his work, English Poetry After Byron II, in La Revue des Deux Mondes. On 15th January, Milsand's follow-up 3-hander covering Elizabeth alongside John Reed and Henry Taylor is positive enough, but certainly no rave. Still, by the spring, Milsand is spending every Tuesday evening at the Brownings. Their cultural milieu is tilting towards Robert. This tilt increases as Elizabeth's illness allows him to resume the conventionally male literary life, while she's confined at home by pulmonary disease and goes out alone through with her blessing, her intellectual chat and writerly gossip. But she is determined to meet George Sand, the brilliant French woman who is her near contemporary. Almost as soon as she arrived in Paris, she has persuaded Robert to ask Carlyle for a letter of introduction to Sand from Italian activist Giuseppe Mazzini. Robert, who himself meets Sand several times, seems offhanded virtually to the point of obstructiveness. It's almost as if the diminutive Ba has replaced the major talent who is Elizabeth Barrett Browning in his mind, but perhaps he's simply not quite a bohemian, he thinks. Sand has a scandalous reputation as a sexual free spirit and as a woman writer who thinks too. When all three do eventually meet on February 15th, 1852, Elizabeth encounters once more that the other way of being a female intellectual. She seems to be, in fact, the man in that company, and a profound respect with which she has listened to. A great deal have impressed me. Scorn of pleasing she eventually had. There never could have been a color of coquetry in that woman, coquetry. And I liked her. I did not love her, but I felt a burning soul through all that quietness, and she was not disappointed. Life seems a little easier come the summer from July 2nd to October 12th, 1852, the Brownings are back in London, renting at 58 Welbeck Street, again roughly 100 yards from 50 Whipple Street. Again, they see Henrietta and Surtees Cook, who again come to stay nearby. Again, they also meet old friends and new. Through Jane Carlyle, they meet Mazzini in person. The wealthy hop farming Pains of Farnham introduces clergyman novelist Charles Kingsley. Through Coventry Patmore, they meet John and Effie Ruskin, lunch with the couple, and review Ruskin's collection of Turners and the christening of Halman Tennyson. Robert meets F.T. Palgrave, later the famous anthologist. After escorted his disgraced father into French exile, Robert is back in town with Sarinia to help dispose of Robert's senior home. Elizabeth's intelligent, self-effacing sister-in-law spends the rest of the summer with the couple, and their only other disruption comes in August when Wilson asks for a pay raise from 16 pounds to 20 pounds. Robert's sort of money refused Wilson's response that she needs to better pay employers, but in fact, she and the Brownings are now by friends and housemates as much as employers and employee. By the time she goes north on September 3rd to spend 3 weeks with her family, she has already agreed to stay on. The relief is huge. The household relies on her, which she is away on the equivalent trip last year. Elizabeth found herself in a dreadful state of slavery, with Wiedemann hanging to the skirts of my garment wherever way I turned. On October 16th, the household is back in Paris. From the Hotel de Villa Ecave, they watched Louis Napoleon's triumphant return from the tour that set in motion his process of becoming emperor. A week later, they set off south. This is abrupt, but Elizabeth has been coughing since September, and John Kenyon has given them the money for a swift return to Florence. They travel overland via Lyon, Turin, and Genoa, and where Elizabeth is so weak and they rest up for 10 days. I was no longer flesh with Robert's flesh, only bone of his bone. Fever and cough every night had completely wasted me away. Elizabeth tells Mrs. Jameson later that they arrive home on November 10th or 11th. My deep joy, I cannot tell you how pleased I felt, dear Florence. I do love it, certainly, though Robert, demoralized man that he is by too enchanting Paris, maintained it's dead and dull. I feel myself back in my rat nest again and can't enjoy it too much. Within a couple of days, even her cough is better. We have no fires on the 14th of November, nor think of fires, and have forgotten my cough, but it's all but gone, and the chest is free as a bird. This time, though, individual bodily autonomy will not be confused with civic liberty. Neither nor baby can be said to flourish less for the revolutions and counter-revolutions, the putting and pulling down of the liberty trees and the invasions of Austrian and French armies. Back in Paris on December 2nd, Louis Napoleon is crowned Emperor Napoleon III, but here in socially and economically depressed Florence, life is altogether quieter. Pen's old Balia visits, kissing Pen again and again. She's almost knocked out all my front teeth with her energetic kisses. Although Alessandro has found another job, His children come over, Madame Bionde and Mr. Stewart and the Cottrells, and heaps of other people come through the door. The frightening decline in Elizabeth's health has been halted, and the smart of a very happy winter with nothing from without to vex us much, but the spring revisits poems of the third 1953 edition, and with Roberts deep in men's and women, Elizabeth has also started work on that project that she's had so long in mind, the new narrative poem that will become Aurora Leigh. This brings us to the eighth frame. Could you look me in the eyes in the biblical tradition from which the compassionate philosopher Emmanuel Levinas comes? The encounter with the other person isn't a response to the entire face. It's only the eyes that are the light of the soul, where personhood sees and is seen. And surely this is why people who are going to be executed are blindfolded or hooded, not really to protect them from seeing their fate, but to protect the executioner from seeing them and being seen by them, to protect the executioner from seeing himself fail his primary duty, that is recognizing and preserving the other person. The photographs taken by the highly accomplished Fratelli di Alessandri in the last 2 years of her life, we see Elizabeth trying to look at photographer in the eye, posing with and without pen. Her chin is ever so slightly down, and she glances ever so slightly upward. It's the pose that Lady Diana Spencer made famous as a shy young royal fiancée. Diana looked dazzled by the world's gaze. Elizabeth, too, has been a shy young woman. Now she seems simply worn out. Success and illness have both worn down her defenses. She looks towards Father Antonio D'Alessandri, toward this figure whose face, as she tries to find it, is hidden under a blackout hood, and as if the camera's inspection is nothing she must bear, she's trying to stay still too, of course. And May 22nd, 1861, 4 weeks before her death, she looks at the camera that will deliver its final verdict, and her eyes seem to express the undefended acceptance. She looks at the lens with sincerity and expectation. That's the end of this chapter, which will lead us to how to lose a body. If you ever think there's any truth in telling into what I'm saying here, please like and subscribe and enjoy, because this is the story that they wrote about for centuries, the American dream. In the world of violence and hatred, we pray for peace again.